Recently, we've seen an uptick with people's interest in ancient Rome, and you know when something becomes popular, Hollywood won't be very far behind. So hopes were kindled somewhat when we found out that in 2024, we would be getting not one, but two major Rome-themed releases, Gladiator II, which I talked about in a previous video, and the far lesser known Those About to Die, a miniseries brought to us by Peacock. And while Gladiator II managed to scare off almost anyone interested with its own trailer, Those About to Die is proving to perhaps be the most disappointing release in recent memory. And I choose the word disappointing carefully. It's not just bad, because being bad is pretty much the norm these days. But instead it opted for the Star Trek Voyager path, where somehow the most amazing concept for a show was turned into a bloated, driveling mess that manages to insult the intelligence of its audience in more than one way. So without further ado, I present to you the Rome that DEI built. Let's dive in. If I had to summarize the plot of Those About to Die in one word, it would be scattered. The show has a staggering 41 characters, about half of which are credited as main roles, and almost all of them get dumped on you in the first episode, making it impossible to remember anyone's name or purpose in the story. Ostensibly, the show is about the chariot races, and how various players, from slaves all the way up to the sons of the Emperor himself, are tying their own ambition to the chaos and uncertainty of the racetrack. It's a good idea, and it's nice to see this part of ancient Rome brought to life, but that's where the fun ends. In reality, you have multiple plot lines forced down your throat at the same time. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Vespasian's youngest son Domitian is vying for power, trying his best to make his older brother, Titus, the heir apparent, look bad in the eyes of his father so he can be chosen as the next emperor instead. You have the sitting consul, whose name I can't remember because there are so many people in the show, who becomes the majority shareholder of the Blue faction, and his scheming to crush his rivals on the track. You have Tanix, or Xanax, a plebeian who seems to be in charge of all the gambling in the city, and his friend, the famous charioteer Scorpus, and their plot to break away and form a fifth racing faction that they will be the owners of. You have Zimbabwe, the noble savage, an enslaved black Numidian, because, don't you know, everyone from Africa is black these days, just like Cleopatra, who becomes a gladiator and teams up with another gladiator named Vigo, who dream of burning Rome to the ground. You have Zimbabwe's sisters, who have also been enslaved, who become caught up in a web of spies between the racing factions, and of course you have the girl boss mother of Zimbabwe and his sisters, who journeys to Rome in an attempt to buy her children back from their bondage, and take them back to Africa. You have Titus, who is in love with the Judean queen Berenice, and her subplot of trying to ensure better working conditions for the Jews in the city. You have three Spanish brothers who come to sell their horses in Rome, and end up making a deal and becoming part of Scorpus's racing team. And you have... Wait, I think that was all of them. I'm pretty sure I haven't forgotten anyone here, but if you started to zone out halfway through that, I don't blame you. This isn't one show with one plot. This is at least 6 different shows with 6 other subplots running through each of them. And none of them thus far have gotten any chance to make me care about who is doing what, why, or, as I've demonstrated, even what their names are. Which is a shame, because some of the actors are clearly giving it their all. Anthony Hopkins is an old and dying Vespasian, who is having to decide what will happen to the Empire after he's gone. The actor who plays Domitian also does a great job of putting on the mask of a cool politician, while hiding his own fears about what might happen to him should his brother take the purple. But on the other hand, you have actors who deliver their lines with what at best can be called disinterest, and at worst boredom. In particular, Titus just stands around looking like a rock most of the time, as if he doesn't know what he's doing there, which is the exact opposite of how he is portrayed historically. But the real problem I have with the show is how it treats the audience, and anyone who knows even a cursory amount about ancient Rome will be raising their eyebrows at some of the dialogue and characterizations here. Now, before some fat balding nerd in the comments section sounds off about how Gladiator took certain liberties with actual history, and how squeezing a good story into a limited time frame necessitates the sacrifice of certain historical accuracies, I'm not talking about the standard creative liberty here. In Gladiator, the reign of Commodus is greatly truncated, because the story is one about the revenge of Maximus, and so his end must come in a way different than actually occurred. I don't mind this for two reasons. One, because the story necessitates it, and two, because the important message here in regards to Commodus isn't the length of his reign, or how he met his end, but the quality, or lack thereof, of his character. His growing insanity, and the conspiracies that rose up around him due to his betrayal of the high standards his father had always aspired to. These get the point across, and accurately as well, and tell the audience all they need to know about the reality of Commodus's reign. In short, the fiction that they create represents the reality of history in a way that does justice to both. In Those About to Die, however, not only do we have fictionalizations of certain characters, but references to events or actions that are either outright fabricated or miscredited to an incredible degree that I find shocking. Take, for example, in the first episode, which starts with a riot over the grain supply. Vespasian is unsure of how to handle it, but then Domitian reminds him of the strategy he used at Alesia to distract his enemies. Alesia? As in the famous Battle of Alesia, fought by Julius Caesar in the Gallic War? The same Alesia in a province that Vespasian never fought in? Why? Why do this? You could have chosen Jerusalem, or one of the many battles Vespasian led in Britannia under Claudius. So why just steal credit for one done by an entirely different person more than a century earlier? And this isn't the only time this happens either. When deciding who to choose as his successor, Vespasian is struggling between identifying the greater danger, the barbarians from beyond the empire, and the factions and usurpers from within. Vespasian's conviction that the external threat is greater leads him to choose Titus as his heir. But then among the barbarian tribes he names ones such as the Huns, who don't even exist yet, and the Gauls, who, as we just identified, were subjugated over a century earlier, and have been part of the Roman world since, with several of their nobility having joined the Roman Senate long ago. The Britons are also mentioned, despite the fact that Vespasian himself took part in the subjugation of Britain, and the revolt of Boudica is now almost 2 decades past. Now, a lot of people might gravitate toward the conversation that Vigo and Zimbabwe have about the Black Pharaohs of Egypt from long ago, as the definitive "this is woke" moment of the show. But unlike the debacle that was Queen Cleopatra, there were Nubian pharaohs, although the irrelevance of Zimbabwe and Vigo to the overall plot does make this feel more tacked on, just to get a let you know moment out of the script. There are a few other throwaway moments in the plot like this, like when the horses that the Spanish have sold to Scorpus get poisoned, and the only hope for curing them is the volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius. Not only does Scorpus himself travel there for some reason, but of course, as this story takes place mere months before the eruption of the volcano, and the subsequent destruction of the surrounding areas, you might as well put a giant neon sign at the top of the screen that says "foreshadowing" on it. The show also isn't without more grievous missteps in storytelling either. When Xanax makes a deal with Domitian to establish his own racing team, the Golds, for some reason they fail to announce this enormous departure from tradition, and wait until the bets have already been placed and the crowd is in their seats to reveal that, oh, in fact there's an entirely new team that you didn't know existed and couldn't have bet on or against, whose chariot is being driven by the most famous and successful racer in the entire empire. And so the entire crowd stands up and floods back to the betting floor to change their bets, which is ridiculous, and then a riot ensues because people feel cheated, which is totally understandable. And none of this makes any sense, because why would anyone do something like this and think it was a good idea? And don't you dare say that it's because Domitian has his hands in the ownership. That's a backdoor agreement, and as the aedile in charge of the games, it's literally his job to make things like this public, and ensure the continued success of the games. And all of this is really a shame, because this show has some of the most visually impressive moments I've ever seen. The chariot races are brutal and furious. You can feel the rivalry between the different factions and drivers. The real Circus Maximus had a capacity of something like 150,000 people, and you can see why. This type of entertainment would absolutely have been the pinnacle of its time, where fortunes could be won or lost in the inches that separated first and second place. The city of Rome also feels seedy and alive. The filth of the lower city is contrasted fantastically with the pristine orderliness of the palace, where the stakes are much higher than anyone realizes. It's hard, because we finally get a show with such incredible potential, set during one of the most impressive dynasties in imperial history, with the seed of a plot that could have given us something special. And it all has to go down the drain because no, it's not enough to have a tight plot and characters we come to know deeply and feel for. We need diversity and inclusion to be present in everything we do, even if it means bloating up our cast to unreasonable proportions, and taking screen time away from the actual interesting elements of this story, and giving it to dullards who have no impact on the greater plot at hand. And that's it for the first 3 episodes. I'm going to keep watching this show because I'm already knee-deep, and I like the horse races, so why not? But if you're starved for Rome content, and on the fence about watching this one, do yourself a favor and read some Suetonius or Tacitus instead. It'll be a better use of your time anyway.